Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight, CF Jingara. We have plucked him out of the bush. He has not lit on fire. He is breathing well, even though he suffers from asthma. And he has chosen his site wisely. If you don't know who I'm talking about, please come over to CF Jingara on YouTube and subscribe. He only has 1.41K subscribers currently. We're going to get that up to 2,000 tonight. And let's talk about Australia, CF. You're an ex-bushfire specialist. You worked in the bush. You fought the fires. And most recently, you fought the fires on your own homestead and more devastatingly on your family's homestead, just to the north, I believe, and a little bit to the east. But the conditions have changed. And the change is for the better. We have severe rain affecting most of the continent. And we can see here from this graphic that most of the perimeter of Australia has been saturated in up to 100 millimeters in some areas like Grafton and Brisbane, as well as just east of Wyndham, where they've gotten 100 millimeters of rain, which is needed to quench these fires. But yet, the fires are not out. And what I mean by that is that we have some spectacular imagery that the bomb tells Dubbo, and please tell us what Dubbo is, to expect rain.
Dubbo.
Yeah, Dubbo. But massive hoodoos were experienced. Now, these are named, these type of hoodoos or these windstorms were named from the Middle East. They happen out here in Arizona where I live, and they come up to our region. But this is not what they were expecting. So let's just touch on the bomb and their lack of knowledge on climate science. And let's talk about what's actually happening in Australia. And welcome, CF. We love you.
Love you too, mate. Now, with the Bureau of Meteorology, we have a long history of seeing them fail because they homogenise their data. They tinker with it too much. They don't use empirical data enough. And they have gone through a steady procession of cooling the past, which has shown a warming in the future. And so quite often with their weather reports that they put out, they get them quite wrong. And in recent times, they've been getting them more wrong than you would actually be able to count on your hands. They literally are waiting to the last second to put out their severe weather alerts. They're afraid to put out weather alerts for major systems 1 to 2 days ahead in advance. And so people who are trying to prepare are getting very little time to do any preparation work. And I find that extremely annoying. It's hence why I do part of my channel is to make sure that people are aware of these weather events that are occurring. And we'll get into that further in this video. Now, that haboob or dust storm at Dubbo, that dust storm actually ran for about 900 kilometres in length, and it was actually running right down the front of the last low-pressure system that crossed the country, and that was the hot northerly winds that were coming across the front of the convergence line and picking up all the dry dust from the outback. And yeah, some of the footage there on that little video on the ABC shows the person driving into it and having to pull over because the dust storm is so absolutely thick and dark. Within 2 or 3 seconds of being in that dust storm or haboob, it's pitch black. So these events are becoming quite common this year. That's largely due to the drought. The outback of Australia is so dry that as soon as there's any wind, the topsoil gets picked up and, bit of wind here now. And
well, yeah. I got something downloaded, so let me parse this and let's watch it. See if we can watch it. This is the guy driving directly into the haboob, which, by the way, is basically a wall of debris. And if you were to fly into this in a small aircraft, your plane would crash. And many modern vehicles, their air intake system will die in there. And you can see him go right into it. Look at how dark it gets. That's amazing.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that happens with these dust storms is that they do huge damage to wind turbines. So any of the wind turbines that are in any of the areas where these wind dust storms are coming through, the leading edge of those wind turbines gets pitted, and they end up getting so much damage on them that they have to end up replacing many of the blades on the wind turbines after multiple dust storms.
Now, CF, I got some information coming out today. I was doing some research before you sent me your email because I was expecting it a little earlier. But we live on different sides of the planet, so I don't even know how we're operating because you operate like in the night when I'm in the day. But that's unimportant. What's important is that I was seeing some inklings of the fact that the powers that be in Australia are starting to pick up on permaculture principles and that the need to burn these areas. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so what's happened is that because there's been discussions around what is the next step that the governments of all the states that have been affected, along with the federal government, they're trying to work out how they're going to mitigate their future. Now, the largest issue is around the controlled burning and the hazard reduction to make sure that fuel loads are reduced. Now, obviously, after this big fire that goes through, there's going to be a lot less areas that need to be burnt next year. And so they've got a little bit of time up their sleeve to do some really good planning. But what they'll need to do is they'll need to get onto all of the planning and preparation of the next season's or this winter's hazard reduction very quickly. And so the government is now putting some funding into the bushfire department that's been set up effectively under the federal government, and they're going to be working with the state governments to build policies that are appropriate for Australia's future.
So CF, these haboobs move through, and we have this live interactive map up now that comes from Australia, and it's showing a direct line wind from the last event, the haboob that moved through Canberra, that moved east, and it shows power lines knocked down, almost maybe like 500 of them. Now, what does this?
Yeah.
How is that working on the grid over there?
It's been bad. So that line is actually the line that the big hailstorm and a mini tornado took through the centre of Australia's capital city, and about 250 major power lines were taken down by hail the size of duck eggs and golf balls, some up to the size of tennis balls, some of them are the size of the top of a Coke can. And Canberra really doesn't get hail that large often at all. The largest that Canberra might get would be golf ball sized hail. So this was quite a unique event. And it took down power lines, it destroyed solar panels, it destroyed greenhouses, and the destruction's been pretty catastrophic. But the amount of small businesses that have been affected by this has been pretty intense too. A whole bunch of my workmates have been affected personally by this. They've lost all the food in their fridge and their freezers. It's not a good setup. So unfortunately, the grid can only be so resilient when you get one of these concentrated events. They really do a serious amount of damage.
So as I pan out on these regions, CF, what are the dark regions we're looking at? These are the burn regions, correct?
Yeah, correct. So they're the fires that are largely now fully contained and only have very small hot spots left in them. The one that's immediately to the right of the Canberra area where we were looking at originally is the one that's closest to me. Now it's completely out. They leave it on the map because there's the potential of some of the very hot, still burning logs in the centre of the fire could potentially throw up an ember at some point with some high winds. So they never take the fire map down until they're 100% confident and there's been a large amount of rain to put it out. Now we've only had.
I find it
quite funny
that every time I try to blow out the region to show the fires, it re-inflates it for me. So I actually can't show it to the public. But what I want to point out here, CF, is very
Sorry about
important that the Canberra event that just happened in the last 24 hours that knocked down those power lines is independent of all the fire scar zones. It's actually in an area that was unaffected that has now been affected. So the people in the major city centers that thought they were in the clear from the fires actually got bit on the ass with this one.
Absolutely, and it's happening all around. Sydney then got hit by that same storm about 4 hours later, and there was a large amount of damage done through southern parts of Sydney as well.
Well, let's talk about the epic hail that shredded trees, the only remaining trees that weren't burned. And these were in the Canberra region, right? And not only that, we're going to get to it in a minute, that there were some amazing permaculture institutes and other growing facilities that were also damaged. But let's just talk about, because I live right near, just 3 hours to the north of here, just east of Pikes Peak, the largest peak on the Continental Divide. We have some major mixing when fronts come together, and that actually produces the largest hail in North America. And that region we saw, as predicted, which we predicted 2 years ago, the largest hail to develop based on space weather. And it certainly did this year. We had hail up to 7 inches, 3 different events in the spring, which probably destroyed like almost $1 billion worth of cars. Now, the same thing happened there, and tell me what's going on in Australia.
Yeah, so that storm, when it came off the mountain range and onto the flats near Canberra, so Canberra's skirted by the Brindabella Mountains, and so it can generate some pretty funky weather down in Canberra. And what's happened is that the thunderstorms come through. At the last moment, the Bureau of Meteorology put out a warning saying there's potentially hail and high winds, and so very few people actually had a chance to get their cars under cover. And by all accounts, at the latest news, and the latest news beyond what I've sent you, they're up to 29,000 claims for damaged cars, and they're now expecting, as you can see there, work for all of the panel beaters around town will last beyond a year, and that's just a huge, huge amount of damage. It's not just cars that was damaged. There were solar panels that were damaged. There were greenhouses, you name it. Catastrophic. Yeah, that's a real disappointing thing to see. Yeah. Yeah, so I've seen those older greenhouses before because I used to cycle past this facility on a regular basis when I was riding my bike a lot. And the old greenhouses, they're made from steel. They're made from 10 mil laminated glass, and so they don't make them like that anymore. The newer ones, I believe, are a combination of Chinese and Australian made, but they obviously, they're nowhere near the hail resilience that they have been claimed to be. So the cost to the government, because this is a government-funded organisation, will be probably in the tens of millions, not just the greenhouses, but also in the setback to the generation of drought-resistant crops. So this facility in particular was generating a new series of wheat, barley, and other grains to be more drought tolerant and work in these poor soil types that we have here in Australia. So unfortunately, it has a bit of a flow-on effect to agriculture in Australia, and like we didn't need another kick in the butt, but we keep on getting kicked in the butt on a regular basis at the moment by weather, and it all ties back to this drought.
Well, add insult to injury and learn from your failures, indeed, in this particular case. Now let's talk about PETA and their nonsense.
Yeah.
Please. Let's talk about the fact that PETA blames wool, sheep in Australia for the bushfires. What say you?
As soon as I saw it, I thought, oh, you're going to love that one. So what they've done is that they've put out an information pack to their members, and what they've been stating is that because sheep generate an amount of methane, which is fairly small really compared to other animals, but because they generate methane in any shape, way or form, that you shouldn't buy wool products and that you should use more synthetics or cotton. And, you know, it's just absolute, they're a pack of children. They really are. They're not looking at the world in any, they're not looking at the world with their eyes open in any shape, way or form. And they're simply just, you know, getting children to believe the wrong thing. Because PETA, unfortunately, do have a very young crowd following them. And the younger people become indoctrinated into this sort of ideal very quickly, and they don't think of the ramifications of not having wool around. You know, it's not like we're slaughtering the animals. The wool sheep is a very long-lived animal. You know, they can live for 12, 15 years, and lots of wool's generated. You know, I love wearing wool because it's the best thing to wear in winter.
Well, I hate wearing cotton because cotton kills. More importantly, the animals that we all slaughter to feed our families, PETA should be proud of because we are preventing them from eating their plants. Period.
Oh, dear.
Let's talk about soils. The Soils for Life funded to produce case studies. Now, what's going on here?
Okay, so Soils for Life is a small non-for-profit organisation that was set up by former Major General Jeffreys, former Governor General of Australia, and he's a farmer from way back, and he followed a couple of landholders in his area that were seemingly able to bypass any drought, that there was something that they were doing on their land that meant that they could get away with a drought situation. So sorry about the wind, it's getting a bit windy here at the moment. But the Soils for Life organisation has basically now been given some federal government funding to assist in actually getting more farmers to add carbon to their soil by leaving stubble and not tilling. And there's a whole series of reasons that they are now doing studies on, which include some minor parts of permaculture. So by doing key lines and small swales on land to hold the moisture in the land, on top of keeping lots of stubble, and which then generates carbon in the soil. So those high carbon soils, as you know, produce more grass, more crops, because they can hold more moisture and they hold more wonderful natural fertilizer in the soil. So it's good to get some movement going at a federal level now.
Yeah. Do you think that things are going to be in the upward swing over the next several years, where there will be some excellent forest mitigation and actual permaculture principles adopted in your region, or is it just talk?
No, I'm finally excited. I'm really getting excited about this because nobody's disagreeing with what's being said. And all of these items are lining up. Like one of the other components that we talked about a couple of videos ago, which was the Malone Institute, where they're doing the reclamation of eroded creek lines and things like that. All of these items, along with the Source for Life Institute and along with the planning for the hazard reduction burns in the forest, they're all going to come together, and we should be able to set a new path going forward here in Australia, which will be fantastic to see. I'm actually getting excited about it.
Well, it's always a pleasure, CF. Is there anything else that we should add to the conversation that would make it pertinent?
Keep on being prepared. Keep on watching the weather in your region. Learn about where to find those emergency reports and get connected to those emergency reports. You know, whether you're following Diamond or whether you're following myself, we're providing you insights into how to prepare for these weather events when they occur. Now, there's a very large weather event coming through Australia in the next 24 hours, and I'll do a video on that tonight and get that out. But we just need to prepare, and awareness is the key. So is permaculture.
Yeah, prepared, not scared is our mantra on the channel. And if we were to go back to the ways that we used to know were successful and that have been changed by the multinational corporations to lead us into this dystopian future, we would know for the better, but we don't. But we can learn from our past generations. My grandmother and her families, they all grew food. We used to grow food in the 70s in our backyard. Almost every home in the United States had a garden. They produced more tomatoes and peppers than they could ever use, and we handed them out in paper bags. That's not happening anymore, CF. We need to go back to basics. Yeah. We need to be providing for ourselves and our neighbors, and we need to get to know who lives next to us, because the future is going to be very bleak if we do not support this type of community-supported agriculture where your neighbor knows what you're doing and you know what they're doing. That way we all can work together. If you don't know what your neighbor is doing and they have no food or supplies and you're growing food and food gets tight, what do you think your neighbors are going to do, CF? They're going to come and get your food and you're going to have to shoot them. This is horrible. Absolutely. This is horrible news for people to know. But if everyone is growing food, we can work together and make a solution to the problems that will arise in the near future.
And that was definitely one of the reasons why I moved to where I moved to, was because I found an area where there are lots of small farms around here, and they've all got small gardens. They're all looking after themselves at some level. And at the same, in the same respect, there are a number of vegetable producers around here which provide produce to Canberra as well. But that's the thing. You've got to find that spot. You've got to find that community, or you've got to build that community.
Find your spot, find your community, find your space. We have very few years to prepare. As we enter cycle 25, and I know you watch the sun, CF, you know that there is the potential for a solar flare that take out the grid. How do you think people in your region will react to a Stone Age situation where there will be no electricity, just say for 6 months? How will it pan out?
I will be very popular, unfortunately, because I've got in this battery shed just here a very hardened solar system that, in theory, I'm not saying it's perfect, but the reality is, in theory, I should have power in the future if there is even an X-class flare event. I've got some very heavy industrial trips on there, so effectively there'll be a large enough gap. It's also a large Faraday cage at the same time. I learnt all that lesson from one of the large lightning strikes that occurred nearby here a few years back that obliterated most of my solar system from the EMP from the lightning. And but it will be anarchy. And luckily, around here, there's not a huge population. It's quite small. So for most of us, we'll band together and we'll work together. But there will always be an element of people who won't be able to control themselves and will want to take what you've got. So they're the sorts of things you've got to prepare for, is that unfortunate event.
Yeah, we even had a friend of ours come over here today. He's one of those lazy pricks. And he had the audacity to say that he's one of the people that's going to go take it. He said he's not preparing because he's just going to go take it. And I said, well, you've got to be one of the best 1% of the takers because the rest of us are armed. And you're going to be coming for what we need to survive. So you'll probably be dead in a few seconds. And he just looked at me blank. He had no idea what I was talking about because he's a sheep.
Yeah. And they'll never learn. They'll never learn, Diamond. Those people who abuse the system, they abuse it continuously in any shape, way, or form that they can, and they never do anything for the benefit of other people. Some of the most amazing memories I have is seeing the look in people's eyes when I hand over a dozen eggs and some fresh vegetables from my garden when I'm giving them to my workmates. And because I produce way more than I can eat, I give it away. I give it to my family. And just when you see that interaction of that relationship building that you get by doing simple things like that, it's empowering and it makes me feel great too. But I understand so many people can't do that. They can't give anything away. They must sell it, or they must get something from it, or take it.
Well, I can tell you, let me relate some of my unfortunate failures here. We moved out here in the most rural place in North America, thinking that people would be inclined to take us up on our free produce or whatever. So we set up at the farmer's market. We charged prices lower than anyone else, and everyone bought our produce. And at some point, I started saying, like, if you don't have money, I'm willing to give you the produce for free if you need it, for nothing in return. And then even when I tried to give out tens to 20s of pounds of summer squash and winter squash to people in need, they became reluctant. They became confused. They were looking at me like, well, what does he want? And I said, all I want is you to have this food. That's all I want. But they couldn't get it. And we are creating a society that does not understand that there are people that are willing to give away everything for the benefit of humanity. What do you say about that?
Yeah, it is disturbing, and I've seen that, probably not to the same level, but I have seen that occur in many circumstances. People get worried. Why are you giving it away? Is there something wrong with it? And then
is it dirty?
They never come
Did
back.
you spray it?
Again.
No, we're an organic permaculture farm. We pissed on it, and maybe the cat shit on it, but there has never been a chemical on our farm ever in history. We will never bring a chemical here unless it falls from the sky due to chemtrails, which don't exist, by the way.
Oh, I know. Chemtrails. Oh, I hate. Oh, I'm getting sick of them. I really am. What a crock.
Well, let's take that crock to the bank. And thank you once again, CF Jingara, for coming on the show, supplying us with actual information from the source, the Australian bushfires. Check out his prepping and planning, permaculture, and practicality over at CF Jingara on YouTube. Please subscribe to the channel. I don't know why he doesn't have 2,000 subs. We have 60,000 subs that obviously don't care about real information, CF. What do you think?
Oh, it's probably because I'm not how to put it, putting bullshit out there. There seems to be a lot of channels out here in Australia that put bullshit out, and they get 50,000 people. They're putting all these, they're making all these fires happen to put a train line through, and all of a sudden these people are getting 60 or 70,000 viewers. And it's like, well, sorry, people, I like facts, I like the truth. That's what I present. Enjoy it.
So let's end tonight with the nonsense of directed energy weapons and plasma weapons. Why would you need some type of Star Trek type weapon to light a fire when a retarded German tourist can do it on his own? Please, can you extrapolate on that?
I'll have to stop laughing first, but anyway, yeah. Look, some people have been putting on their social media these little photographs of a helicopter with a red line coming out of it into the fires to start it, and you just got to laugh because we don't need that. We've got enough arsonists, we've got enough lightning, and we've got enough foreign tourists who don't know how to put a campfire out. And so, why would there's no need for this, and the fires are randomly burning in different locations. The biggest fires have all been lightning.
Dude, let's jibe on this. Directed energy weapons are the most useless weapon ever needed in the history of the world. Can you confer that?
I've seen some of the math around what energy is required to get it to happen, and you'd need a nuclear reactor to make it work properly from space.
All right, so let's break it down. Let's break it down. Nuclear reactor versus dumb German tourist with a match. I'm going with the dumb German tourist because always the simplest explanation is the explanation. It's called Occam's razor.
Occam's razor, mate. Absolutely. Absolutely Occam's razor. Every time.
We can't be more pleased and happy that you came on the show tonight. Thank you for your candid interview. Anything else you want to tell the people? We love you, CF.
Just one thing. 24 hours before that storm hit Canberra, I believed that there was going to be something big being built in the next storm that came through Canberra because of the bushfire smoke. And I believed that it would provide additional nucleation, and it looks like I might well have been right.
So you predicted the haboob.
I think so. Absolutely.
Well, the rest of them can suck it because you were right. And we love you, CF. Be safe. And most of all, we are so pleased that the rains have hit your region and that you're getting it under control. Stay tight.
Love you, mate.